Professor Spooner, how are you today?
Good morning, Frank. I'm fine, thank you. Watching what's happening with borders all over the world, not only with the government in Washington and the plans for a border along the southern wall, a wall along the southern border of the United States, but also the problems in Syria and other parts of the world, well, Afghanistan in particular, which people think of in terms of the withdrawal, the current U.S. administration's plans to withdraw U.S. troops. But the problems all start again with borders. And the problem is that democracy that we think so highly of as a way of organizing society politically keeps running into problems which are not yet ascribed to democracy, because people don't realize that the problem really is who's making the decisions for whom. And the way decisions are made worked very well, or seemed to work very well, when the American Constitution was started. The application of it began at the end of the 18th century, but it doesn't necessarily continue to work in the same way. And certainly the borders that created the countries of Syria and Afghanistan in the Middle East made perfect sense to the British and the French, who were trying to reorganize the world after the defeat of the Ottoman Empire at the end of the so-called Great War, 1914-18. It didn't make sense to the people in the territories concerned. And now the border of the southern border of the United States, which one could, I suppose, say was democratically decided, but it was a decision that took some time to make, and it was really a negotiation as much as a decision, I think. Is contested by so many people who from societies south of the border, who have similar reasons for wanting to be here as the people who came here from Europe in the first place. So how do we manage democracy in such a way that it continues to work for all the people concerned?
I just want to be sure I understand what you're saying. We've often talked about these arbitrary borders that have been put in place by colonialist representatives sitting around a conference table with a map and a pencil. But I'm not so sure that the Southern American border, I suppose, coming out of the negotiations with the Mexican government back in the 1800s after the war against Mexico, and then the Gadsden Purchase with the southern Arizona border, they've been in place for well over 100 years. I mean, they're not necessarily the same as these artificial lines that perhaps we've often talked about. Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, each border that you look at has been drawn in a somewhat different way, but in a way that made sense to the people drawing it at the time. But in each case, not necessarily to the people on either side of it as it was drawn.
Okay, well that certainly makes sense, because I mean with the southern push, I mean clearly if the border wasn't there, I mean more people would be coming from the southern part of North America, correct?
And most of the borders were drawn at times when people were not moving around as much as they are now. So, as society becomes more and more global, more and more people are moving from one place to another.
Well, it's very interesting, because if you look down the big three, take the big three, what's going on in the United States right now, what's going on in the United Kingdom with Brexit, and what's going on in France with the Yellow Jackets, and go to four, what happened to Merkel in Germany. All of those occurrences are stemming from forced migration, if you will. All right, people coming in to these countries, or the perception of people coming in, and then a corresponding kind of and I don't mean this in a negative way, a corresponding kind of nativist reaction or backlash to this. And so we're right back where we started from, where we always start from. There's this idea that there's this group of people that are within a quote nation and don't want outsiders coming in. And then there's a pressure of outsiders wanting to come in because they have no place else to go or they're striving to get a better life. So which is going to win? The idea of increasingly free movement of humanity, of humans, or is it going to be the erection of barriers and more kinds of isolationism that Brexit certainly is, that the American administration certainly is, and that the reaction against Macron in France certainly is?
Well, I think the problem is that as society becomes more and more global, people are become less and less, what shall I say, nationally oriented. And the whole idea of a nation in the first place was artificial.
Mm-hmm.
It was an idea that worked for a while, mainly for religious reasons, because it all started with the Reformation and the localization of, or what shall I say? I'm trying to avoid the word national, of the idea of who could determine what was correct Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
And the protection of religious rights in each community, and stop people from outside one community determining what was the correct form of Christianity for other communities, which was really part of the reason why the church had tried to remain a single church for so long, in order to maintain a uniform interpretation of Christianity. But now I think that the efforts to, everybody needs a dependable social order so they know what to expect in their day-to-day lives. Mm-hmm. And the larger society becomes, the more that social order has to be renegotiated, because more and more people are interacting with each other over larger and larger areas. And all the things that are happening in the way society is changing as a result of globalization threaten the integrity and authority of national governments. And we've already seen that we have the idea now of failed states, mm-hmm. Where governments, in fact, have not been able to maintain their authority. But obviously, the effort to stop people coming into this country, which began as a country of immigration, is a very interesting test case.
Well, how should we I've been thinking about this for a long time. For example, in the United States, there are 35% of the people who seemingly are aligned with the view of America first, America isolated, a bit of a nativist kind of viewpoint. I think the polling in the United Kingdom since the Brexit vote probably has 35 to 45% of the people, which continues to decrease as the effects of Brexit become more clear. It might be around 35% who similarly think the same thing there. I mean, are these people last gaspers against globalization? And is it right that this 35% bloc can control the other 65% that might wish to have more open borders and might wish to more participate fully in globalization? I mean, what are we seeing here? Is this the end, or is this the way it's going to be?
Well, one of the points that I have been making on and off for some time is the unevenness of the globalizing process, that some people are ahead of it, in favor of it and pushing it, and other people are less welcoming and in fact afraid that it's destroying the social order that they depend upon. And it's interesting that another end of this which should be mentioned, I think, is that Native Americans have had very little representation in the democratic processes of this country, and now one female Native American is in Congress.
I believe so. Yes. Yes.
And that's getting very favorable notice in the press.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, most of the people who don't benefit from the social change that comes with globalization have no way of protecting themselves against the effects of the social change that globalization brings with it.
Until now. But that's precisely my point. I mean, and I don't want to localize this into an American political discussion, and I'm not going to do that. But the point is that now this group of people who have been who are anti-globalization, if you will, who have not benefited from it, who don't typically have a reaction response mechanism, in fact, seem to control the direction of policy of the American government. And I'm
not sure that they're controlling it, but they're causing the problems in the same way that they are in the Brexit situation, and also in the Syrian and Afghan situations.
Right.
So it's the unevenness of the process of globalization which underlies all these problems, I think. And one thing that puzzles me somewhat is that it's not going on in other parts of the world, because after all, one would expect the same sort of thing to be going on in Argentina, which has a similar history of immigration to the United States. But of course, it's possible all sorts of things are going on down there that we don't hear about. But all the boundaries of the so-called nation states of the modern world, the 193 members of the United Nations, which are nation states in order to be eligible to be members of the United Nations, are artificial, and I think are likely to be contested. If they're not contested already, it's very likely they'll be contested sometime in the future. It's only a few countries like England and Australia that have an obvious sea boundary, although Australia, in fact, is the only one that doesn't have boundary problems, because in England we've got the boundary problem between England and Wales and England and Scotland. Mm-hmm. And Northern Ireland and Ireland.
Right, exactly. I'm not sure what I don't know how to look at the world today. As I say, I don't know if this is just simply a bump in the road as globalization continues to spread and increase, or whether this is and what we're seeing is, as I say, a last gasp, or whether or not this is perhaps a fundamental change. I don't know the answer to
that. No, I think it's something we just have to wait and see. But I think that the point that I would like to finish up with is that globalization requires, it brings social change with larger and larger numbers of people that requires flexibility in the organization of any sort of political process. Well, at the moment, we don't have the means to provide that flexibility.
It seems that we in the U.S. neither have the means, and it seems that the British don't have the means, and it seems that the French don't have the means. These elected democracies seemingly do not have the means to adapt.
The British are trying to take back the means.
Yes, that's your brother.
Or at least half of them are.
That's your brother talking. Yes. All right, Professor Smoter. Well, we'll see where we end up next week. Maybe the American government will be open again, and and maybe the British plan to leave the European Union will become more clear.
Maybe.
All right. Thank you very much.
Bye.